Hi, so today we're going to be making a souffle with all the eggs that you have. So first step is to take a cup of milk and you're going to put that in a small saucepan and just heat it up until you start getting little bubbles around the edges. So it's just going to start simmering. Keep an eye on it. You don't want it to get too hot and boil, but it needs to start simmering. So while that's going, you're going to take your 6 egg yolks and make sure you save the whites because you'll need them later. And you're going to mix into that just a pinch of salt, a 1/3 cup of sugar, and 3 tablespoons of flour. And you want to do this in a bowl large enough that you can whisk this all together. So this is going to whisk until everything's well blended and then until the color gets pale. And that's obviously dependent on the original color of your eggs. So you can see right now they're starting off relatively dark, so it's not going to get that pale, but you do want a pale color. So you're going to sit and whisk this maybe for 2 minutes or so, depending on how fast you are, while you keep an eye on your milk. If you start to get a film on the top of the milk, you just want to kind of shake that so that it gets mixed in. And then once that milk starts bubbling around the edges, you're going to turn the heat off. Check where you're at with your whisking. If it's pale in color, then you're good to go. If not, keep whisking a little bit and then you can add the milk. So we'll check back in a second when these two are ready. So our milk has started to simmer. Our eggs are pale. It's been about 3.5 minutes of whisking, and it builds muscles. It's good for you. This is pale in color compared to where we started. If you're using eggs that are not ours, if you have normal store-bought eggs, they're probably going to start about this color or paler, so just adjust accordingly and make sure that you whisk them enough that they're pale compared to where you started. So now at this point, we need to heat these eggs, but we don't want them to start scrambling or cooking. So we're going to temper the eggs. So with our hot milk, we're going to slowly pour a little bit of the hot milk into the egg mixture to start to gradually warm the temperature of the eggs, but not warm them so quickly that they're going to cook and scramble with the whisking. So we put a little bit of milk in, whisk it around, a little more in, and then gradually add the rest of that milk. Once you get a decent amount in, you can start to add it a little bit more quickly, but you do want to be constantly whisking to make sure that you don't end up with any hard egg particles in there. Once we get all that milk in, we're going to add everything back into our saucepan. Oops, spilled a little there. And heat this back on the stove. So we're going to heat the eggs even warmer now. So we've got those eggs up to the milk temperature. Now we go back in. And we're going to put this back on the heat. Now at this point you again have to make sure that you're constantly whisking. And this is going to turn this into a custard. So as the mixture gets warmer, your eggs are going to start to firm up a little bit. Everything's going to heat up and it's going to get very thick. And that happens quickly, so you want to make sure you are here whisking and you keep an eye on it. So as you whisk, it's really liquidy now. Pretty quickly it's going to start to thicken up. Make sure that you take it off the heat before it gets too thick, because it does continue to thicken a little bit after you turn that heat off from the residual heat in the pan. So we're just going to whisk this. It's going to take maybe 2-3 minutes, and then I'll show you what it looks like at the point where I take it off. So I can start to feel as I'm whisking that this is getting thicker. You can definitely tell the difference as you go. So once you start to feel that you have a little bit of resistance in there, you really want to kind of watch. And try to get the whisk around all the corners so you're getting everything off those sides. And we are almost there. It's starting to feel quite thick. You can see the bubbles on the top are getting much bigger. And you can see that the whisk is starting to leave little trails, and that means that we're thickening up here. So I think I'm going to cut the heat here. You can see it's getting pretty thick, but I'm going to keep whisking because we still have that heat in the pan that's going to continue cooking this. While that's going, we're going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla. It smells awesome as it heats up. And that's that. So I'm just going to transfer this to a bowl, cover the bowl with plastic wrap, and cool it to room temperature. I always put it in the fridge just so it goes more quickly. Make sure you do cover it with a plastic wrap. If you don't, the top is going to get a crust on it that won't taste good when it turns into the final product. So our pastry cream is cool. You're going to want to do the step before anywhere between 2 hours to 2 days before you're going to eat the souffle. This part, however, you do want to time carefully because you need to make sure you eat the souffle hot out of the oven because that's when it's best. So I would probably start this step 35-40 minutes or so before you want to actually eat the souffle. So what we're going to do, I have my oven preheating to 375 and I have my souffle dish, or you could use a casserole dish, something round with relatively straight sides is what you're looking for. I went ahead and I buttered the inside of this, so the whole bottom and sides are covered with butter. And then I'm going to dust sugar on the inside. So I'm going to put a bunch in and just shake it around so that all the bottom and the sides are covered with the sugar. And what the sugar is going to do is help the souffle rise. It kind of gives it something to grab onto on the sides of the pan here and helps it rise up. Plus it tastes really good when you eat it because you have this nice sugary crust that you get to eat. So that part's not so bad either. So you just want to kind of rub the sugar around like that, and I got a little bit left in there. If you have a lot left, you can just dump it, but that's pretty good there. So the pan is ready to go. Next step, I have my pastry cream, which has either been in the fridge or you can let it sit at room temperature to get ready to go. And you'll notice I had the saran wrap really tight on the surface of the cream as opposed to over the top of the bowl. And that is just so that that cream doesn't dry out on top. I'm going to whisk this and just make sure that it's all mixed in and ready to go. That one's nice and thick. Yours doesn't have to be this thick. This is probably about as thick as you'd want it. So if it's a little more liquidy, that is okay. So that's ready for the next step. Now, here in my mixing bowl, I'm going to need my egg whites. So you use the yolks in step 1, you can use the whites in step 2. So I've got those saved. They've been sitting at room temperature. You don't want them cold. So I have my room temperature whites here. And I'm going to whisk these until they form soft peaks. And it'll take a couple of minutes. I'll show you what the soft peaks look like when we get there. So as you're watching your egg whites, they're going to go from liquidy to kind of foamy to where they're going to form the peaks. So if you watch the foam as it's going to have big bubbles when it kind of starts getting foamy, and they're going to get smaller and smaller. And you'll also see the beaters start to trace kind of their pattern in the egg whites. So we're almost at the soft peak stage right now. So I'm going to turn it back on so you can see what that looks like. Once it starts to look really fluffy like that, to check what the peaks are, you're going to lift your beater up, and if it pulls the foam up and then the top of it curls over like that, like you see on the bottom, that's a nice soft peak where it curls. If it stands up stiff, it's getting a little bit too hard. If it kind of puddles and doesn't form a mountain like that, then it's not hard enough. So that's a nice soft peak. At that point, we're going to keep whisking or keep beating it, but we're going to add in 1/3 cup of sugar gradually as it goes. And this time we're going to beat it to a firm peak, which you're going to have the peak come straight up and then not move, not kind of top down at all. Now you can see the eggs are starting to look a little bit shiny. They look a little bit more solid, less foamy. And when you pull that up, we're still getting a little bit of a bend on the top of the peak, so I'm going to let it go a little longer. But once it gets to this point, you can overbeat it, so you want to watch closely and make sure you just get to that hard peak. So we're going to go another few seconds. And that's looking like it's probably pretty good. Yeah, we'll let it go a little bit more. It's close. All right, at this point, looks great. At this point, you're going to start mixing this into your pastry cream. So I need to clean out everything that I have stuck in here, because we don't want to miss any of that in our final product. I'm going to take, I don't know, about a quarter or so of these egg whites and mix them into here. Now the whole idea with this portion of the recipe is to keep as much air in the egg whites as you can. So you don't want to stir them into the egg yolk mixture, or you're going to break down all the little air bubbles in there. So we're going to fold them in. So you take a spatula, a rubber spatula, and you cut down the middle, and then you kind of fold up over the sides. So it's going to slowly mix this in, cutting through instead of smushing the ingredients. So it blends them while still retaining some of the air in there. So this first batch that you blend, you're going to blend relatively well. We're going to end up smushing most of the air out of this one, honestly. You don't want a whole lot of white streaks ending up in your egg yolks for this one. So I'm just going to keep folding it as we go, and it's going to incorporate the egg whites and the air into our custard. And once that starts to look like it's relatively white streak free, I'm going to fold the rest of this into the bowl. So you want to make sure you use a bowl that doesn't have like a bump on the bottom or a hard ridge on the bottom or anything like that, so that you can fold smoothly. So that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to just take the rest of this and get it into my bowl. That is nice and fluffy. That looks good. And this I want to fold very gently, because this is where I really want to keep those air bubbles. So I'm just kind of turning the bowl as I go to mix this in evenly. And the more air you keep in there, the more fluffy your souffle will be in the end, which is how we want it. So we're getting close. I don't want to fold this in so much that it's completely homogeneous. I still want to see some yellow streaks and some white streaks. It's not too important that I get it completely mixed in at this point. Pretty sure my spatula's got some non-mixed in stuff, so I'm just going to wipe that off. And that looks pretty good to go. So then I've got my prepared pan with that sugar. I'm just going to spoon this into my pan, or my dish, I suppose. And still being gentle so we don't get rid of any of those air bubbles. And I want to get every last drop because it's delicious. Jack and I can finish off one of these by ourselves, which probably isn't a wise idea. It probably is supposed to serve like 4 or 6 people or something, but it's really good. And it's definitely best right out of the oven. So you can't save it for leftovers. You can, but that would be ridiculous. Alright, so this is going to bake for roughly 30 minutes. And again, you do want to eat it directly out of the oven. So if you're trying to time this for dessert after dinner, get your dinner ready. Get this step ready, pop it in the oven, eat dinner, and then we'll see you for dessert. So I set my timer for about 25 minutes because I'm very careful with this and I don't want it to get overcooked. It wasn't ready at 25, I put it for 3 minutes longer and we'll see what we've got. What we want is a nice golden brown top, and you're going to see it puffed up over the top of the pan, and I'm just going to hit it. And if it jiggles a little bit on the inside but not on the outside, it's ready. If the whole thing's pretty jiggly, or if it's not golden brown, then we're not ready. So that's a little too jiggly, so I'll let it go 2 more minutes or so. And I do only let this go for a couple minutes at a time at this point and then check it because it has to be. So a few more minutes have gone by, let's see what we've got inside. Looks nice and brown, and it just jiggles slightly, so we are good to go. So you'll want to bring this right to the table. If you're like us, you're all going to just grab a spoon and dig in. If you want to, you can take a big spoon and put portions on plates for people. Some people will also make cream sauce to put on it. We generally just can't wait, so we eat it right out of the pan. So you dip in, and you get a nice, fluffy, airy, delicious, vanilla-y dessert. Careful, it's hot. Awesome.